Today is August 21st, 2024, and we have the privilege of interviewing, and I'm going to have you state your full name, date of birth.
Theresa Watkins, and I was born October 31st, 1948,
And where were you born, Theresa?
in New York City.
Uh-huh. Is there any particular borough in New York City where you were born?
Yes, Queens.
Uh-huh. And tell me a little bit about your growing up in Queens, New York.
I grew up with 6 sisters and brothers. We were a rowdy bunch, but it was all fun. Our family is close, so I could go to parks and plays and all types of things. We did it within the family. We stayed busy.
And how did your family end up in Queens, New York?
My parents both were born in Aiken, South Carolina, and it didn't have a lot of work, so they migrated to New York City for work opportunities and a better life for us, better education.
Yeah, yeah. And what kind of work did they find in New York?
My father worked in a racetrack, and he trained horses. And my mother worked in a cleaners for a while, but she was mostly at home with us.
Mm-hmm. And how about siblings? Did you have siblings growing up?
Yes, I had 2 brothers. Actually, there are 3. One brother passed away very early on in life. My other brother died maybe 15 years ago, I think it was. And my younger brother, he is still alive, and he lives in New York City, and he works for the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My younger sister, she has a disability with her legs, so she retired early. But she worked for the state of New York, 911 operator for about 20 years.
So, growing up in New York, what educational opportunities did you have as you were growing up?
Well, it's a lot bigger than New York. There are more choices in selecting high schools, colleges, trade schools, and you just had more opportunities simply because it was so large.
And where did you go to school?
I went to school in Queens. I went to elementary school, junior high school, and high school in Queens. I did eventually go to junior college for about a year, but it wasn't for me at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you selected what career path for yourself? Or did somebody help you select that path?
Well, I came from a working class family. So if I wanted to travel the world, I'd have to work. So I started out as working for First National City Bank and applied for work with TWA, and I was actually hired.
So you eventually went to work for an airlines, and tell us about how that happened.
I had always been very impressed with travel, and traveling, you needed to have money, so I had to earn it my way. So I was just delighted. The first airline that I applied for, we went through various steps of the hiring process, but eventually I was hired.
And what was that airline?
TWA. And I worked as an air hostess.
Yes. Well, and I think that probably changed your life, the direction of your life, and maybe eventually brought you to Kansas City.
Were there a lot of people that looked like you when you worked with TWA?
There weren't a lot, but there were some.
Okay, were you treated indifferently at all?
No.
And what was the training process like? How did they train you?
It was 6 weeks training, and an air hostess is actually there for safety precautions. So in case of someone becoming ill, if there was a fire, any type of emergency, we were certified to handle it, by way of the captain. Yeah.
And I remember you mentioning specific details about how you all had to dress, how you had to prepare yourself with your makeup and things like that.
Yeah, TWA was very particular. Our uniforms weighed 5 pounds, and I believe my legal weight was 118. So if I weighed, and they checked us every month, so you'd go in for a weight check. And if you were overweight, they would make you stay out until you couldn't return to work until you were the legal weight again. The training itself was 6 weeks, and I don't remember now how many young ladies were in the class with me at that time. We were all young. I think I was 19, and the youngest girl was 18. The training was tough. Whatever they taught for that day, at the end of the day, they test you, and the passing mark was 90. So if you got an 89, you were out. And the training room was in like a horseshoe shape, and we didn't have paper. We would enter our answers into a computer, so they would know the results right away. And if you got an 89%, that next day you had to take 2 exams and get 90 or better. So it was tough, but I made it through. And at that time, the 747 was a new plane, and we did training on that plane. And so we would pretend that we were reacting to an emergency. And they would inflate the balloons that would go all the way down to the ground. And just every kind of scenario that you could think of, it would happen on that day. And we all had to jump out of the plane. And that was scary. You never knew how large a plane was until you have to go down a slide. Yeah, so it was interesting and difficult.
Yeah.
I was stationed in Kansas City, and 2 other females that I graduated with, we got an apartment on the plaza, and we worked in shifts, so it worked out okay. I would like to add that I graduated high school in 1968, and that's the year that Martin Luther King was assassinated. And at that time, and prior and after, there were all kinds of strikes going on with football, baseball, telephone company. Everybody was on strike. So when I did begin work for TWA, they were in crisis also, and they had strikes.
So the strike was related to just the economic situation that was happening in the country, or?
Work conditions, more money, better benefits.
Yeah, for the
that kind
workers,
of thing.
yeah.
Everyone. It wasn't just the air hostess, it was everyone. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it lasted 16 months.
What was your first impression of Kansas City when you were living here as a worker for TWA? Stewardess, I guess, was what they called them back then.
Hostess.
Hostess.
TWA called us hostess.
Yeah.
What was it like? Growing up in a big city where there's a lot of activities you can get involved in, Kansas City shut down at maybe 10 or 11 o'clock at night. The television would go off the networks would close down about 2 o'clock, and we had 24-hour television in New York City. Now it's cable, so you can do what you want. But back then, you know, it was a culture shock. I can't put it in another way.
The history around that time, do you know who was in control of TWA?
Not really, but Howard, the billionaire Howard Hughes, he owned the controlling shares. And it was my belief, according to my limited understanding at that time, that it was believed that if he had controlling shares of the corporations, that TWA would be successful again, you know, because they were running into trouble. And Howard, Mr. Hughes, was taking money out of the company or corporation to fund his own corporation. And that kept making it go down. And so I don't know how it was, but the administration and Howard Hughes, they took Howard to court and they sued him for over $100 million. I don't remember the exact time, but I think this court case went on for like 16 years. And by that time, another billionaire had came into control of TWA and Icon. I don't remember his first name, but he too took money out of TWA to invest in his other companies or corporations. And as soon as the lawsuit was settled with TWA and Howard Hughes, Icon, he took all the money out. I think it was $38 million, a lot less than what they thought they would receive. And that really ruined TWA. Before Icon took that amount of money from TWA, he also sold the London route to American Airlines. And I don't remember how much that was, but maybe $10 million or something. And he just sucked the life out of TWA, and it made it very hard. So as it worked out, many of the people that were still working for TWA eventually went to other airlines, or like myself, we got other jobs. Mm-hmm.
So after you left TWA, did you stay in the Kansas City area?
I did for a while, but eventually I returned to New York City.
Did you meet my father, Warren Riley Watkins Jr., working with TWA?
I did. I think that was 1971. And you know the story from there. We kept in contact, and eventually we got together, and eventually we married.
Okay, and where did you and Warren Riley Watkins Jr. get married at?
In New York City.
Okay. Now, was he from Kansas City or was he from somewhere else?
He was actually born in New York City, but his parents moved to Kansas City before he was a year old. So he's really a Kansas City person.
Okay. Do you know much about his history in Kansas City at all? Growing up here in Parkville or anything like that? Did he talk to you about it?
No, he did not. The only thing I actually knew is that they, at that time, owned a funeral home that had been in their family for almost 100 years. A funeral home business, yeah.
And you also visited the farm and the farmhouse.
Yes.
Okay, and what was that like?
A lot different than New York City.
Tell us a little bit about how your relationship developed.
when I wasn't working, all TWA hostesses was on call. And when I wasn't working, a group of us would get together and go out dancing. And that's how I met your father, at one of the clubs on the plaza. And we had a lot of fun. He was a very good dancer. And I've never drank or smoked, so whenever I go out, I actually just dance. And so we had a lot of fun. Later, I did know that there was a family business and they owned a funeral home. And they also owned a boat on the Lake of the Ozarks, so we and other friends had gone there and did those kind of festivities. And he was pretty much a cowboy. We rode horses and he grew food and, you know, all the kind of things that I never expected to do. So it was, you know, something different, and I had fun doing it.
Yeah.
So that's how I met Warren Watkins Jr.
After your relationship with Warren Watkins Jr., how did the family evolve and transpire? Tell us a little bit, share if you would with us, you know, how that developed and your children's names and so forth.
Okay. Well, I did go back to college, and I think it was many years later, after all three of my children was born. It's Richard Watkins, it's my oldest son. Orly Watkins is my middle child and the only daughter. And my youngest son is Warren Watkins Jr., the third. So after I had my children, I decided that I would go back to school. And I started back at community college, and I took like refresher courses, and I applied at Rockhurst University, and they accepted me, and I did successfully complete their coursework and graduated. And afterwards, I went to work for the state of Missouri as a probation and parole officer.
And how long did you stay with that department, the probation and parole?
10 years.
After you had children and a family, you decided to settle in Kansas City permanently, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so what is your career path? How did that develop during this period of having children and going to school and working and so forth?
I had children later in life, and I was an older student when I began Rockhurst University, so I was older. And I selected a career that I could retire from. And that's how I selected either working for the state or the federal government. And I thought that the Department of Corrections would be a good opportunity for me. And that's why I worked for them.
Tell us a little bit about the work that you did for the state in the probation and parole.
Well, my caseload consisted of about 60 to 65 members. And when I first started, I had both male and female. And those that were recently released from prison, I would do home visits for them. We review their parole orders so that they would understand what's expected of them and what's expected of me. and I would give them ideas and resources to better improve their lives. And it was both female and male. Yeah. Eventually, I had just a female caseload, and they were high maintenance. Yeah. But basically, the job was still the same. And as it is today, I don't know what the number one drugs are in the streets now, but in the past it was cocaine, methamphetamines, and there's a lot of drug abuse. Children are removed from homes, and just a lot of things, human nature things that you would like to help people improve their lives and just be better people, become assets to the community instead of engaging in criminal activities.
Right. So do you feel that the work that you did with some of the clients that you had was successful, and you saw some success cases during that time?
Yes, I do feel that I had a lot of success. Some of the, especially the young men who were close with their mothers, and a lot of the mothers did not have high school diplomas and they needed help too, so I was actually helping the entire families. They would come into the office and get resources, and two families that I remember, the mothers got their equivalency high school diplomas, and they were able to get jobs, and it was just wonderful being able to help family get a second chance at life, a better life. While I was employed by the state of Missouri, I also did volunteer work at public housing. Florine Jones, she has since passed away, was a very active person that managed the residents that lived in public housing. And I, at that time, was working with the scattered site housing. I don't remember exactly, but I think it was about 60 individual houses within the community that were scattered all throughout the city. And Miss Florine would work with the residents that lived in public housing, and I worked with the residents that lived in scattered site housing.
Who wrote the plaque that said at Clymer Center about T.B. Watkins' accomplishments?
In 1939, T.B. Watkins established public housing for the Missouri area. The housing was originally used for military families, and he wanted to convert those houses into homes for moderate and low income families, and he was successful at doing that. And during his lifetime, he was presented awards by two presidents, President Truman, and President Eisenhower, I think it was, that was after him. And he just did a lot of wonderful work. Today, public housing is now expanded to every state within the United States. And it houses not just low and moderate income people, it also provides housing for people with disability, for senior citizens, and when foreigners come to the country, many of them reside in public housing. It provides more resources to assist the people and help them to become part of the community, eventually becoming assets to the community.
So reflecting on that and what is happening today with so much homelessness, what do you think needs to happen, given that in the past the federal government has stepped in and helped provide housing? Is that a possibility in today's world where there are so many homeless people that are without permanent housing? housing?
I would say yes, uh, for the people that are willing to follow the rules and regulations. There are many homeless people that are drug addicted and they will not follow the rules. If someone wants to receive help, there are conditions and some people won't follow the conditions. And it's my belief that many people bring their circumstances on themselves. You know, just because you had a bad day doesn't mean that you have to drink a pint of something in order to feel better about it. So yes, public housing can help, but people have to be willing to restructure their lives. They wouldn't be in their circumstances if they knew how to better adjust to their circumstances. So if people are willing to help you, you have to be willing to do your part as well. It's not a free handout.
What did you expect out of your children? What was it like raising your children in Kansas City? You're not from Kansas City, you raised us here. What was that like for you?
There are many things that I like about Kansas City. It's not a lot of traffic congestion. You can go to places and find parking spots. You can call on the phone and speak to someone and get straight answers. The lines are not long here. When you go to the motor vehicles, you can wait a reasonable amount of time, but it doesn't take a whole day. Kansas City provides local advantages that New York City doesn't provide. I can't say much about the crime because we have crime issues here as well. And different than New York. New York has the toughest gun laws in the country. In Kansas City, if you have the right information, you can apply for, register, and purchase a gun. So, you know, the violence here it can't be avoided. Not until we make some changes or our government steps in and make it more difficult for people to obtain weapons, you know. But yeah, so I decided that Kansas City was the best place for me to live with and raise my children. I was a hands-on mother, so academic-wise, New York schools, in my opinion, provide a better education, but I was educated there. So the shortcomings of the schools system here, I insisted that my children learn and I taught them at home. I didn't leave it all up to a teacher. So my children have all grown up. I have 3 adult children, as I've mentioned, Richard, Orly, and Stedman. And all of them are independent. They own their own homes. And they're assets to their community. And they're raising their family in a much more calmer atmosphere than if I lived in New York City. It's just so many people.
Talk about the Watkins Foundation and the activism that your husband, Warren, initiated, and how did that all evolve, and how were you involved with that push to tell the whole story about the African American population of Kansas City, and particularly of Platte County and the International Airport out in Platte County?
I wasn't always involved in Warren's community activism. I had gone back to school and I was a full-time student, and I was a full-time mother. And my goal at that time was to graduate college, and by the time my youngest child was 5 years old, I would also be employed full-time, and I succeeded with that. But in the meantime, when all of those types of community activism happened, Lee, my daughter, was becoming of age, and her father took her everywhere he went. And they would tell me their ventures at the end of the day, and I was content with knowing that. So I didn't really get involved in that part of the activism. I didn't. After being married several years, I eventually applied for a divorce with my then ex-husband. And it was such a long, hard thing to do, as I would imagine people who have divorced realize. He fought me tooth and nails. He hid his assets, and our court case went on for a good 6 years. And eventually enough was enough. He refused to sign the divorce papers, but the judge did approve it. After my divorce was final, maybe a year or two later, I discovered that the University of Missouri Law School used my case, or they still use my case, in their law books in order to train their students. And they were very shocked that I came out with little or nothing. I had my sanity, my health, my children, and new skills, and I could become self-sufficient, and I did.
Okay, is there something you would like for your children and your grandchildren to remember you by? Is there something you would like for them to know?
Life 360 is a project that my daughter Lee founded, but it's built on my ideas and organizations that I created on paper years ago. I actually typed up what do we call it?
Proposal.
Yes, in order to get you going, in order for Lee to get started. And I'm very much a part of what she's doing now. I think that I'd like my grandchildren and for my community to remember me for helping to establish an organization that will serve my community long after I'm gone.
What is the main objective of the Watkins Foundation?
The Watkins Foundation's goal is to provide services to the people in our community that they will benefit from and become assets, and encourage them to do community service and just keep it going and continue to train and raise young people with goals, values, value in themselves, and become the type of individuals that they can be proud of themselves as well as other people in the community.
What are some of the activities the Watkins Foundation is doing to implement your goals and to help accomplish those?
The Watkins Foundation is basically operating on seeds that I planted years ago. I participated with the Assistant Care Parents Network, Combat, the Blue Springs Police Department, They had a leadership program for children, the International Society of Poetry, Swope Parkway Higher Connection Intervention Center, Department of Housing and Community Development Urban Corps, the Housing Economic Development Financial Corporation, American Humanics, the Haven House, which is a drug treatment program, Scattered Site Resident Management, the Housing Authority of Kansas City, Juneteenth Committee, Paseo Baptist Corporation. They built 20 new houses in the community years ago. Backing up to the Housing Authority, because I married into the Watkins family. My then husband's great-grandfather, Theron B. Watkins, had did a lot of community service, and I wrote an article about that. My then husband took the information that I wrote, had it placed on a bronze frame, I don't know, a very large one, and the words that I wrote was inscribed on the plaque, and he didn't put my name on it. And that I've learned to adjust to, because it's not my story, it's Theron B. Watkins' story. And he's still serving people long after he's expired. And I am participating with the Watkins Foundation after planting seeds in my children, and they operate on automatic, and we discuss and develop and grow.
You mentioned Paseo Baptist. You told me my history about Olivia Watkins being a member of that church.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that, what you know about the history?
Paseo Baptist Church, I am a member of that church. Since I arrived in Kansas City in 1982, my then husband's grandmother was a member of that church, and she helped build a wing on the Paseo Baptist Church, and they eventually added a daycare center. And she was very active in the community also, long after her husband died, who was T.B. Watkins.
Reverend Briscoe and Mrs. Williams, do you know about how that educational program began? Because I do know Briscoe, I believe he's from Parkville. I don't know if he had a relationship with Olivia or not, or anything like that, like as far as business relationship, but I do
He
know
had to. Reverend Briscoe did have to have a relationship with your great-grandmother, because she helped build the wing on the church. I don't know much about Parkville, but if Reverend Briscoe was from Parkville, then he had to be working with Olivia, your grandmother, your great-grandmother.
And he and Miss Williams, Irma Williams, started the school.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that?
Not really, only that two of my children did go to Paseo Baptist Daycare Center. Warren Stedman Watkins III and Orly Watkins.
How would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered for contributing to my community as programs that will serve the people long after I've expired.